But we're not here to talk about the long game. As always, we nominated a couple of seasons each for you, the listener, to vote for. We had 143 votes. And on this occasion, whilst second, third and fourth all swap places a lot, one season hit the lead and stayed there and won decisively. Season 13 got 18.9% of the vote. Season 26, which was doing very well last time we put it up, only came third with a mere 20.3% of the vote.
I was shocked.
I was a bit surprised by that as well. Season 15, 25.9, but a nearly 10-point win for Season 11 with Jon Pertwee, 35%, a strong leader all the way through.
Yeah, how can we argue with the listeners, Dave?
No, absolutely. And look, I'm very happy to talk about this. And I'll be honest, there was a moment when I had a little bit of worry because I thought, what can I say about this season? But if I could just kick us off, Rob, with sort of a bit of nostalgia.
Yes.
This is, I am very confident I can say, the season of Doctor Who I have watched the most in my life.
Really?
And I can say that because this was clearly the point at which my dad decided that video recorders were not just for recording what you missed while he was at work, but for actually recording series and stories and keeping them to watch again and again and again. So this is the first season where we had almost the whole thing from the start to finish on VHS off air. It wasn't just odd episodes or odd stories. It was the whole season pretty much, with only 1 or 2 episodes missing when we were in Queensland as it happened. So not only did we have it on VHS, but this was repeated and recorded when I was about 5. So I was exactly the right age to go and rewatch all of these stories again and again and again, particularly a couple of favourites I have in there. They were just watched so many times. And so this is the season that I am the most familiar with. In some ways, therefore, it's the one I haven't watched all that much over the last few years, and 1 or 2 stories I haven't watched for quite a while, because they sort of seem a little bit too familiar. You're like, oh, I know that story off by heart. Why would I watch it? Go and watch something I don't watch very often.
Yes.
So this has been a really lovely experience going back and watching it. I'll wax lyrical a little bit more, but Rob, what are your memories of this season? How did you come to it?
I have a very different experience to you, Dave.
Right.
Because although Pertwee was one of the more repeated Doctors in Australia in general, I didn't have a good sense of his era as a whole until I'd gotten into fandom a bit. I hadn't been watching it on TV. I'd missed a lot of him on TV somehow. But when I got into fandom and had access to other fans' tapes, that started to change things. You know, I can remember as a very young fan, probably circa 87-ish, I was pestering our local fan club president to do me a VHS dub of The Demons, and I was very taken with that story. And in fact, when I met Katie Manning the first time, I got her to sign the Demons novel. So I did sort of start to get into the Pertwee era around the time I got into fandom around 87. But even then, I had a problematic time with him as a younger fan. I just wasn't sure I liked the era. I liked the Demons very much, but a lot of the other stories I didn't like. Something just didn't click with the portrayal or the look of the era. Maybe it was all that damn CSO or something. Very, very conflicted over the era, and as such, I didn't sort of see season 11 in any sort of coherent way, like watching it on TV night after night, or even watching VHS tapes in the right order. It was probably when the DVDs came out that I watched it properly, and even then probably not in the right order now that I think of it. So I've come at it from a very different direction to you.
No, that's really interesting. We are coming at it from very different directions, because I can remember very much watching the Pertwee era again and again and again on repeat. You know, there'll be a repeat of the Pertwee era, then they'll do season 24. Then there'll be a repeat of the Pertwee era, some Inchcliffe stories, and then season 25. Repeat of the Pertwee era, maybe some Graham Williams stories. Season 26. Repeat of the Pertwee era. Repeat of the Pertwee era. You know, I grew up with this.
That's what I mean. You know, it was one of the more repeated Doctors. I remember watching Tom like that. I can remember watching Tom until it came out my ears.
Yeah.
But Pertwee is this... I don't know how I missed so much of it. I really don't.
And yeah, absolutely. Certainly growing up, Pertwee was my favourite Doctor, and so there's a lot of nostalgia, and I suspect I could end up using the phrase "as a boy" quite a bit in our discussion here. So that's where I'm coming from. But I have taken the chance to watch this season as a whole from start to finish with fresh eyes. And as I do with these reviews or these discussions, I don't know if you're the same as me, Rob, but sometimes when you sit down and you watch a classic Doctor Who that you're very familiar with, you might sort of not feel guilty if you go and do a couple of things while it's on. Like, I'll put it on and I'll start cooking dinner, and I'll be cooking dinner, and then I'll go and watch it again whilst eating dinner. Or if I get a message on the phone, it doesn't matter if I miss the next scene because, I know this story off by heart.
Exactly.
Whereas when I'm going back to watch these things now for the podcast, I do make a point of actually watching it and no distractions, laptop shut, phone off, well, not phone off, but phone, to the side. And so that's the way in which I've launched into this here. Opening comment, these are my favourite title credits. I love them.
I think the very initial, the first few seconds of these credits still looks like the most modern thing Doctor Who has ever done in its credits, with those stars that come at you. I think it still looks amazing.
Yeah, it really does. It's timeless.
Yeah.
And it really just works so well. And Pertwee looks good there. You've got the first iteration of the Diamond logo, and it's colourful without being garish. I think it's really, really lovely. Would you mind if I get us started on the Time Warrior then?
Oh, please.
As I was watching the Time Warrior, particularly part 1, I thought RTD could have written this. This is an RTD season opener because it's extremely accessible. It's extremely fun. There's some really good banter. There's a really cool monster. And the budget is actually being spent very, very well. Lots of location filming, lots of extras, a really cool little spaceship. It feels as though they've spared no expense on this. And Barry Letts is really at the height of his powers in his 5th season, knowing how to make a budget work for him. There's always action going on. There's always something happening. You're never bored with this one. Even if it's just, in part 3, we're just going to have Iron Gron come and attack the castle and the Doctor throws stink bombs at him. Does it add to the plot? No, but it's a very enjoyable episode. And that's how I felt about the whole thing. I just go, this was just easy fun. Almost deceptively easy fun from Robert Holmes. What did you think?
Dave, it's not a story I've ever been that into. I've come to appreciate it a lot more as an adult, but it's still not a story like, oh my God, the Time Warrior, oh, amazing. I've never been like that. And I feel like something's wrong with me when I say that, because this is Bob Holmes, who I love, and I know a lot of people love this, but I just can't get enthused about it at all. I see that location filming. I see that the Sontarans are an awesome new creation, and it's partly design, but I also think it's partly Kevin Lindsay. I think Kevin Lindsay brings so much to it as well. I'm probably not the first person to say it, but just like Bernard Bresslaw sort of defined Ice Warriors, I think Kevin Lindsay defines Sontarans.
Sure. Yep.
So I do see all of this. I'm not blind to this. I don't want you to think I'm actually crazy, but I've just never got that enthused about it. It's weird. It's a weird one for me.
I kind of see a little bit of where you're coming from, because I agree a tiny bit with this, and also with the Carnival of Monsters. They're both stories that a lot of people put in their top 3, top 4 Pertwees. And I sort of go, well, it's good, but it's not that good. It's not top 5, maybe even not top 10 for me. But then you watch it, and I think it's the same with Carnival. I watch it and go, this is just deceptively easy. And maybe Robert Holmes's gift in these ones is we can't see all the moving parts, we're just enjoying it. And another thing that I loved, and I really appreciated just properly watching it this time and focusing on the acting and the characters, is that you've got alien Sontaran in great beard, weird mask. You've got Iron Gron, over the top medieval baron pirate guy, and they're still having this really clever, witty dialogue, and both the actors are playing it over the top but sincerely, and I really enjoy that banter between them. I love the moment when Iron Gron first sees Lynx without his helmet for the first time, and it's something very rare in Doctor Who. Like, maybe someone will see an alien and shriek for a bit, but then we all move on. But there's just several seconds of Iron Gron suddenly go, what the you go? Like, it's just amazing. And that lovely little cut between Lynx primitives, if I did not need their help, and then the next scene, Iron Gron, Toadface, if I didn't need his help. I just really enjoy it. It's a great opening for Sarah. What do you think of Sarah's intro?
Well, We talk about the Chibnall era being a bit ham-fisted with concepts and causes, Dave. And Sarah Jane is set up as this women's lib type, and we'll certainly talk about that with regard to another story here as well.
We will.
And suddenly there's a load of really sexist content in the story for her to rail against. Presumably, if that wasn't the course her character was taking, there wouldn't be as much sexist content in the story. And I think, I'm not so sure about this. Like, women's lib, great. But, yeah, it feels almost Chibnall-esque the way that's sort of done.
Yeah, okay. I see that. I must admit it didn't really... Maybe because I've seen it so many times, I'm a little bit enamoured to it. I think that's definitely a possibility. But I was very struck by Elizabeth Sladen's presence and strength from the moment she's introduced. I love the way that the Doctor very quickly calls her bluff about being Lavinia Smith, and the Doctor, being the Doctor, is just like, okay, look, you're probably a spy. I don't care. I'm just going to roll with it because I'm having fun.
Yeah, that's cool.
And look, we'll talk more about Pertwee as we go on, but this is Pertwee extremely comfortable and confident in the role, and just working his way through stories in a way that's slightly endearing, slightly off-putting, and alien, but effortlessly so.
Yeah, like every Doctor going into their final series, he's really got the idea here, I think. Yeah,
he absolutely does, and I just find it so endearing, even when he's being annoying, which I think is part of the charm.
Now, question without notice.
Yeah.
The Doctor knows the Sontarans in this. He knows them already. He's not meeting them for the first time. Do you retrospectively headcanon this, that because Troughton met them in the Two Doctors, that's how he knows them by the time he's Pertwee? Or, given that the way his time stream is sort of messed up in the Two Doctors, that just Pertwee got to know them some other way, perhaps?
I have taken it as neither. I think that I've always taken it as the Sontaran Rutan War is such a big deal that it's the sort of thing that Gallifreyans learn about in school. Everybody knows the history of the Sontaran Rutan War and what a Sontaran looks like. So when he sees it, he's like, I think that's a Sontaran. And then when he meets things properly, he's like, yeah, I thought so, you're a Sontaran. And even that banter, because, when we get the initial dropping of Gallifrey's name, and there's that banter about, well, we could take over Gallifrey if we wanted to, you're pretty weak, well, I dare you to try. That, again, sort of gives this idea of they're both big deals in each other's worlds. So I always took it that way.
So when he's been having his classes in Lungbarrow with Badger, he's been taught this.
That's what I thought, yes. Everybody's heard of Sontarans.
Right, good.
Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Rob.
Malcolm Hulke story, Dave.
Malcolm Hulke story.
And look, I know we're both card-carrying members of the fan club for this story. And I think that needs to be disclosed up front before we say anything else.
Yeah.
But what can I say? I think, in general, it's one of those stories that has a reputation around one thing, and then a lot of fandom can't see the wood for the trees. And you have a lot of people who have never even seen it start proclaiming that it's a lot of old rubbish, in this case in relation to the dinosaur models. That always gets brought up with this story. And yes, they don't look great in some of the scenes. In some of the scenes they look all right, actually.
They do, yeah.
But has Doctor Who, Dave, ever had to apologise for one aspect of itself quite as much as this story?
No, and I think that is exactly the right place to start. You mentioned the official Invasion of the Dinosaurs fan club, of which we are patrons,
yes,
along with a couple of others. And I know our friend of the podcast, Mark from Diddly Dum, would be very upset if we didn't mention his name as the founder of the club.
Hello, Mark.
So hello, Mark. Look, you're right, but I think that what's interesting, and I don't bring this club up just to be facetious, it is a thing that I've noticed on social media and Doctor Who fandom, particularly Doctor Who Twitter. More and more people are sort of joining those conversations when it comes up and goes, yeah, I saw that when it came out on DVD and it's actually really good and I had no idea. And as people are watching, I think its reputation is ascending quite well. Now, just again, talking about how we discovered this series, I, for a very large part of my life, was convinced that Invasion of the Doctors. Now, that could be the 60th anniversary story.
RTD. Get him on the line.
I've copyrighted it. Invasion of the Dinosaurs was a 5-part story because the ABC didn't have the black and white part 1, and so they would just start it at the start of part 2. And I just always thought, well, this is really clever. The Doctor arrives in the middle of an adventure and we just roll with it. And they did. I noticed this time there were a couple of lines in part 2 that were cut. So there's a line about, well, what about when we met that pterodactyl last episode? That's actually was cut, so I didn't know that. Because of that, episode 1, when I watched on DVD, still feels a little bit newer than the rest of the story. And watching it again, I realised just how creepy that part 1 is and how effective the whole abandoned London with something going on and rules in the background is. I'm surprised that the first reveal of the dinosaur isn't the cliffhanger.
Fair.
But I just think that's really good. And it goes on from there with lots of really good adventure stuff happening.
Yeah, how much do you think that first episode is enhanced, though, by being in black and white? Like the first time I saw The Demons, when I got that VHS dub of The Demons I was talking about earlier, that was in black and white too, because that's how it had been shown on Australian TV. I think it adds to it being in black and white.
Yes, I don't think that it's all down to it being in black and white, but certainly that enhances an already creepy and tense episode. Again, and I'm going to for the first time use the phrase as a boy. As a boy, this was just fantastic. This was my most watched Doctor Who story. 6, 7, 8-year-old boy, Doctor Who and dinosaurs. Come on. How is that not on regular rotation? And it absolutely was. But it still stands up as an adult. And look, let's talk about the politics thing here, because this is a story that is often thrown up when people say, I can't believe how terrible Orphan 55 was and it had a political agenda. Look at Invasion of the Dinosaurs. They've been doing this for 50 years. And you go, yeah, look, you're absolutely right. Doctor Who has. But there is something about this that it works so much better. And part of it is that, first and foremost, this is a wonderful adventure story. And particularly as a kid, you were just excited because around every corner there could be a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The scene in the air hangar where that dinosaur comes to life and Sarah's trying to escape and it's beating its tail against the window and then it smashes its way through and then it bursts through the brick walls. As a kid, that could have been a Jurassic Park special effects. It certainly was in my mind. That was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So it works on that level. It works on the level of them being really good characters. And then the story is allowed to flow within this adventure in a really effective way. But the other point I'm going to make is that a lot of politics isn't about one thing or not that thing. It's about we kind of all agree on the outcome we want, but we disagree on how to get there. And what I think sometimes modern Who does is say, we are for this thing, and if you're not, you're bad. Yeah. Whereas what Invasion of the Dinosaurs...
Well, that's social media all
over
that's
social
actually.
media, yeah, that's 2022, that is. Whereas what Invasion of the Dinosaurs is doing is saying, you know what, the good guys and the bad guys here all actually want the same thing. Some people are just willing to go to amazing extremes to get what they want. And Hulk is saying, as somebody who was very politically active and who was of the left of politics, he's saying when you take any view to the extreme, you can sometimes miss the point of what you're going for, and that's a really dangerous thing. And I think that's a really clever and effective way to do it. The Green Death is very, very similar in that as well, I think.
Yeah, I agree. This is a really fun story with a lot going on, and I think it's worth noting that the dinosaur models, again, to come back to that, I don't think they're even used as much as they could be, because we sort of move on from that, and there's all that stuff that happens later in space, or what we think is space, and all of that stuff's marvellous. There's all this other aspect to the story that people just sort of forget about, or maybe they've not seen the story so that they don't know it's there. I don't know.
Yeah, and look, we need to mention that whole space plot because that's a really clever idea. And again, you see good people. The elders on those spaceships are good people who want good things. Going a bit too far.
They've sold their house, Dave.
They've sold their house. They looked into it very carefully. And it's funny, it says on the side, somebody actually mentioned that thing on Twitter the other day and said, how could he have gone so carefully into this thing? How did he research? I said, you know what, I can point you to a few dozen people on Twitter right now who are giving us views of reality that we know are complete bunker, but they will say they've gone into it very carefully. So, it's not a new thing. No. But that moment where Ruth, who is clearly a good person and wants a good and better world, says, you know what, if she doesn't come round to our way of thinking, we might just have to eliminate her.
Yeah.
That's chilling. That's properly chilling. And so it works really well there. Question without notice for you, Rob.
Oh, okay.
Operation Golden Age.
Yes.
Where and when were they planning to go had the Doctor not interfered and they'd gone back to their Golden Age?
I guess some sort of, a pre-industrialised world?
You see, this is what I don't know. Now, as a kid, I thought that they were going back to the age of the dinosaurs because they got dinosaurs from there, so they're going back there.
Very fair assumption, but it would be quite dangerous,
yeah, they would be eaten pretty quickly. And then I'm sort of like, well, are they going back to the 12th century, 14th century, pre-industrialisation? But how's a bunch of middle-class Londoners, a few hundred of them, going to convince the population of Elizabethan Earth not to chop down the forest to build a navy? How are they going to stop the Cold War? Are they going back to the age of, Neanderthal or maybe, Australopithecus or maybe a little bit later, and they're going to try and guide primitive man for the next 50 years until they all die? And maybe the fact that it is just a bonkers plan is part of the point, but...
Well, there was no Golden Age, Dave.
There was no Golden Age, so that's right. So that's always intrigued me. The final comment I had is... I love the development of Mike Smith here, and this adds to that sense that the Pertwee era, again like the RTD era, is an era with characters that flow all the way through that come and go, that have genuine arcs. The Doctor himself develops, Joe changes and develops as a character, and Mike Yates is shaped in this story by what's happened to him in a previous story, and that just, particularly for 1974... just makes it feel like slightly better than we've had before.
And there's a flow-on effect to another story we'll talk about in a moment.
There is, so I think it just all works really well. Any more Dino comments from you, or do you want to move us on to Daleks?
I'm ready to move on to Death to the Daleks, Dave.
Please take us there.
Terry Nation on board, writing a Dalek story. This is very exciting stuff.
It is.
But let me tell you, it's another one it took me a long time to get on board with. And I don't have the ability to crawl back into my 12-year-old mind and tell you why that might be. Could it have been the Daleks had machine guns instead of death rays? It could be, but I kind of think that's amazing now, so I'm not sure. Did I find the Exelons just a bit weird and hard to understand what they were doing with all that sort of sacrifice stuff? Maybe. I don't know. But on rewatches as an adult in recent years, I find I quite enjoy this, albeit with a few bits that make me go, But on the positive side, Dave, I like the concept of everything losing power, because a disabled TARDIS is quite a scary thing to contemplate.
Yeah.
I like the concept that the Exelons had contact with the Incas, and that's been deduced via the temple carvings they can see in the two different places. I like the concept of the Daleks with machine guns, like I mentioned earlier. I like the concept of the Doctor and Bilal getting through the traps in the Exelon city, and the pair of Daleks are on their tail throughout. And I like the concept of the Daleks being a bit brutal. At the end, they're like, okay, we've got the, what is it, the perineum, and now we're going to plague bomb the planet, and you're all stuffed. Brilliant. That is super Dalek-like. That's what Daleks should do. So there's a lot of positives. I'll get to some negatives later. What if I throw it back to you for the moment?
This was another regular, repeated video watch for me when I was a kid. If you'd asked me at the age of about 10 what my favourite Dalek story was, I would have said Death to the Daleks.
Really?
Now, at that stage, I hadn't seen a lot of Dalek stories, certainly the black and white ones, and where I had, I hadn't quite learned to appreciate them yet, and some of the others just didn't quite have the sense of fun that this had, balanced with the Daleks being really, really cool. And you're right, okay, the Daleks are helpless. They don't sit around and go, we're helpless for too long. They work out, how can we get a gun? And then to prove that they're back, they burst into the town square, so to speak, of the Exelons and just shoot a bunch of them to go, just so we're in no doubt, we're back and we're deadly. That's really effective. I think that's really good. But I just thought it was a really cool, and still do, frankly, a really cool space adventure. Daleks, aliens, great special effects, the city. As you said, that trek through the Exelon city really captured my imagination. I think it works really, really well. Do I still think it's the best Dalek story? No, I think there's a lot more sophisticated stuff, particularly in those 60s Dalek stories. I think I appreciate Day of the Daleks as an adult a lot more than I did as a kid because of the concepts that were going on in there. But there's still some good stuff going on in here. Now, you highlighted there the Dalek plan. I want to come back to that in a moment. But even as an adult, you watch some of the internal politics of the Space Corps. As a kid, I never really picked up on that moment where Galloway hears his commander's dying words. You're not fit for command, hand command over. And he's just, sorry, Commander, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah.
And then he goes and he leads the expedition and he's brutal and he's ruthless and he's sacrificing a certain sense of humanity to get what he wants. But he's the one who sacrifices himself at the end. Now, did he do that because he had a change of heart? Or did he do it because Commander Stewart's right? He is a glory seeker, and he knows the way to have his name go down in the history books, the guy who sacrificed his life to prevent this plague.
Yeah, I think a bit of the latter.
A bit of the latter. So there is proper stuff going on here. I've got a couple more points, but Rob, let's have your negatives.
Yeah, well, look, one of the things that made me go, I'll just concentrate on this one. I'm less down in this story with the way the perineum is treated. Because that's ultimately the reason anyone's there at all. The Daleks are there for it, the humans are there for it. Yet the humans seem to be really ill-equipped at getting it. And even later, when the Daleks are getting the Exelons to get it for them, it's just some Exelons sloshing around in a puddle, in a quarry to mine it. It seems a little odd. And even then, when it's loaded onto the Dalek saucer, it's literally a few sacks. Sacks, it's like the gold rush in the US. It's like the 1800s or something. They got these old burlap sacks. Why couldn't it have been something modern and at least trying to look like it's solid and hygienic, for transport, even some space Tupperware or something? No, it's just sacks, Dave. It sort of brings me out of the story a little bit.
I'll see you and I'll agree with you on the sacks. The other point, though, I think is actually quite clever because it says something about humans versus Daleks. In that humans are now very comfortable with their technology. They expected to be able to go and use wonderful electronic stuff, and they could sit by and have a pina colada and watch the machines sort this perineum. And then when the power goes out, they're like, oh, that's us stuff then. But whereas when the Daleks go out, they're like, oh, we can't do this, we'll do this. If we can't do this, we'll do this. Oh, we have got no power and no sophisticated machinery. Guess what we have got? A bunch of Excelons to make slaves and do it the old-fashioned way. Let's go. And the Daleks are actually cleverer and more adaptable than humans are.
That's a good way of looking at it. I like that.
See, I think there's a lot more going on here.
Yeah. Question without notice, could this story work without the Daleks, Dave?
Yes, it could.
I think so too.
I don't think it would be quite as exciting. I think that they needed a level of menace in there that the Exelons maybe don't quite provide on their own, although they do get close.
Well, we've got Exelons and we've got fugitive Exelons, so we do sort of have two sides of the coin. That's
true, and I've got to say the way that the Exelons move and blend in with the surrounding, particularly in that first episode. Again, we may be in a quarry, but we're in a very well-shot quarry with really clever costumes and designs where suddenly, like genuinely, even as an adult, watching it on a big television in Vidfire and all the restoration stuff they've done to the DVD, there are still a couple of moments where I go, oh, that rock just moved. Oh my God, that's an Exelon. It's that good.
And why are they in those dirty sacks? Are they like lepers or something? Like what's wrong with these people? When you initially first see them, you're very interested in them, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's just a lot going on in this story, Dave. That's why I say, could you take the Daleks out? And I think it would still work, because I think this story just has so much in it, especially for a four-parter.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that although it first and foremost is a Terry Nation space adventure, which I'm totally here for, I think that there is a bit more under the surface than perhaps fans have appreciated.
You wanted to talk plague as well.
I did. What's your take on the premise of the story? Is it that there actually was an actual space plague that did affect humans and Daleks and they're all over the antidote? Or is it what I always assumed as a kid, that the Daleks had set the plague about and they were just waiting for humanity to fall, and then their intel's gone, hang on, they've found a cure, that's an expedition off, quick, stop them getting the cure, and that's what the Daleks are there for?
I think it's the former, because the Daleks do go to such lengths to mine the stuff for themselves. So I think I've got to go with me watching it as an adult, taking the form of you, I think.
Yeah, I think that probably is the correct view, but given that the Daleks do fire a plague bomb or threaten to fire a plague bomb, and we've seen them use plagues in other stories, I don't think that my initial take is unrealistic either.
No. Well, Terry loves a good plague.
Terry does love a good plague, so it's possible. I might even put a poll up about that after this episode drops. Remind me to do that.
All right.
Now, Rob, I'm going to lead us off on the Monster of Peladon.
Sure.
I went into this story having not watched it for a very long time, certainly upwards of 5 years, probably a lot longer, which is a lot longer than any of the other stories of this season.
Mm-hmm.
I went in with the view this is probably the weakest of the Pertwee stories, certainly bottom 2.
Mm-hmm. I just have this feeling your notes are going to be like mine.
As I watched part 1,
Yes.
I thought, this is better than I remembered.
Oh, God. Yeah, go on.
This is going okay. There's some cool ideas in here. There's some cool aliens. There's a bit of action. This isn't a bad opener.
Yeah.
As I went on, though, I remembered why I don't think this is very good. It gets very slow very quickly. There are a lot of conversations that happen again and again and again. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that just don't make sense. And there's a big reason for a couple of those that I will get into, but by the end of it, I just thought this wasn't the utter snooze fest I remembered, but it was very slow and dull, and it is very weak compared to a lot of Pertwee stories.
Okay, we do have different points of view then.
Oh, good.
This is interesting. You know, everyone says this is the crap Peladon story and Godspeed if you choose to watch it and all of that stuff, and they make it sound really, really bad. Like Twin Dilemma bad. But, Dave, I think it's perfectly watchable and fine. Will I go on?
Just for purposes of clarification, for the interest of the jury, when you say that, are you saying, and it's kind of the standard of the rest of the season, or are you saying, look, it's below the rest of the season, but it's fine?
Yeah, more of the latter.
Okay.
But it's certainly, as I say, it's not Twin Dilemma bad.
No.
And if I sat down with a list of Doctor Who stories, I could find a ton of stuff that's worse than this. But people make it sound like this story is really, really, really bad. But I think you have, this mystery of Agador is showing up. He's zapping people. You've got the new queen. She's quite interesting. The Miners versus the Royal Guards. Eckersley and Alpha Centauri. They get paired off a lot, and they're such a strange couple. Yet it works, for them to be having all those conversations. And then halfway through, when the storyline still isn't played out, the Ice Warriors show up and you get a whole new credible storyline and the story gets a second wind. I think there's a lot going on. It's not something that takes, some little simple thing and stretches it out hoping to make 6 episodes work. I think there's enough content for the 6 episodes, Dave. You say it's slow in places. I don't mind it. It's not the quickest story I ever could watch. That's the War Games. I can watch all 10 episodes of that and not feel that 10 episodes have gone by. But as a 6-parter, this is watchable. I'm okay with it.
It's watchable, and look, the comment I guess I'm kind of heading for is, even if this is towards the bottom, if not the bottom of the Pertwee era, that's kind of a reflection of how well the Pertwee era does hold its standard, and I'm willing to say that. There's a couple of fundamental things going on in the Monster of Peladon that are worthy of throwing out there for a start. The first is a bit of a misunderstanding of what the Curse of Peladon was, in that a lot of people even today say, oh, the Curse of Peladon, that's a really clever analogy of the UK's going into the common market. And it's actually really not. It's a bit of a framing device that, hey, what if a planet wanted to join an intergalactic common market? What would that look like? And then they kind of take the story in bizarre ways. But the story is not really an analogy for that. King Peladon is not Edward Heath. And Islia is not Pompidou, and Alpha Centauri is not Helmut Schmidt, it's just not an allegory in any sense. It's just a premise that kind of allows you to build a new world. Mm-hmm. I think they're sort of like, well, didn't that work really well? So let's rip from the headlines again. I know, the miners' strike. Let's have a miners' strike going on. But again, it doesn't really go anywhere. It takes a long time to even get any sense of what the miners are unhappy about. Is it about pay? Is it about they're working too hard? Well, if they're working too hard, why don't they want the new machinery to make their lives easier? It's sort of a bit ambiguous for me. The second point I'll make, and this isn't necessarily a bad point, but it is a point in terms of where this story goes. Barry Letts, as we said, really capable producer. There's an argument he's the most effective producer in terms of actual producing of any that the show has ever had. And he is very smart in going, look, we need to have a cheap story in the season. He doesn't want it to be the big finale, so he makes sure that it's not. So he says, all right, then we'll get the penultimate story, and we'll make that a bit of a cheapie. And that's justified because he's then very clever and says, well, if we're doing a cheapie, let's make it a sequel. Because we can take all the Citadel models and all the Citadel sets and the Alpha Centauri costume all out of storage, and suddenly we've saved a lot of money off the budget anyway. And look, it's a worthy decision because we've been saying all the way through this, look at that lush location footage, look at those extras. Like, the money has been spent elsewhere in the season, and I'm willing to cop with one cheapie for 4 really expensive ones. So I applaud it. But on the other hand, it does look a bit cheap sometimes. The Agador costume looks like it was taken out of storage and didn't have a good time in those 2 years. A lot of those sets, particularly the mining sets and the corridors, Asphyxia's helmet, you can see the paint peeling off it.
Yeah.
So it does look cheap, which doesn't help.
Yeah. Now, look, going back to your first point, people will say, oh, yes, this is a comment or even a parody of the miners' strike. But here's the thing. I think there are more people watching this now, born long after that time, who just have no knowledge of that, particularly people in other countries, which aren't the UK. You know, so this whole thing gets made about it, but is it really something that even most people watching it today would nod and say, oh, yes, I see what Hales is doing there? You know, whether it's this with the miners' strike or the other story with entering the EU. You know, is that something people are even thinking about? Or is it just people who are really, really, really interested in the history of the show or in UK history in general? Yeah,
look, I think that a lot of it does probably go over a modern audience's head, or they think that it's the miners' strike of the 80s, because that's the one that kind of lives in pop culture, and they don't realise there was actually one before. And yeah, the show doesn't lean into the real an allegory of that either. I think if Trisilicate was being used to power Peladon, and the lack of it meant that they had to have, say, a 3-day working week, you know, you would start to go, okay, they're leaning into this. But I don't think that's quite explored. And that brings me to another negative I have, again, comparing it to Curse of Peladon, in that I think this story makes Peladon feel smaller. In the Curse of Peladon, yep, this was the Citadel, it's where the rulers rule, but there was a real sense of, and there are the people out there. In this one, the whole society, the whole world, all happens in one building and the mountain underneath.
Yeah.
And that does, to me, make the universe and the world of the story feel a little bit smaller.
Good point. Now, look, earlier I mentioned women's lib back in the Time Warrior, and we do get more women's lib in this story, but thankfully it's only really in a scene. And again, we often say the classic era did this stuff so much better than the Chibnall era, for example, but not here. No. Again, it's like, hey, tell the Queen about women's lib. What's women's lib? Well, let me tell you about women's lib.
As written by a bunch of 45-year-old men.
Yes, it feels so cack-handed. Rather than just Sarah saying to the Queen, I don't know, hey, don't let those blokes push you around, you're the Queen. And, you know, even if you weren't the Queen, you shouldn't let them push you around. Just some good, strong, general message like that. And some in the audience might even recognise that as being an aspect of women's lib. Instead, they just start using this term to an alien queen. It's just so weird and sort of silly to be doing it. It really sticks out.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's not helped by the fact that we've sort of replaced one kind of wet monarch of Peladon with another. And so it doesn't feel very new in that sense. And when, you know, you think about the fact that if you were looking around the world, by this stage, I think we'd certainly had Indira Gandhi. We'd certainly had Golda Meir. Yeah. Mrs. Thatcher was, if not quite yet the leader of the opposition, very close to being it. I think she would have been just off that because Ted Heath took them to the October 74 election. So yeah, Mrs. Thatcher is just around the corner. But again, we've got a lot of female politicians. Like there are good women leader role models in the world at this time. And had Thalira started off as a powerful woman who is up against a very masculine traditional society, that would have been a lot more interesting. And then seeing how Sarah worked into that would have been a lot more interesting than she's so wet she needs one of us to come and explain feminism to her.
Yeah, and of course the big one, Betty Windsor, is on the throne of England.
Well, that's of course very true. I want to echo something you said. Donald G is fantastic in this, and particularly watching it, knowing that he's the traitor, and the way that he's really worried about some things, not concerned at all about other things. He plays it really well. The bit where he's happy for a few miners in part 1 to be killed by the ghost of Agador, but when his mate Vega Nexos is about to be killed, he's like, dude, don't go over there. Like, it's not that I know what's happening, but I kind of do. It's like, mate, okay, fine. Like, he plays that really, really well, and he's happy to let things sort of go. I don't think that the plot really quite kind of works, because Azixia and Eckersley want the Trisilicate really, really badly, so they shut down the production of the Trisilicate so that things get so bad that Azixia has to come in to start the production up again. It's all a little bit of a mess. The timelines don't really quite work. I mean, I know what's happening, but I think it lacks some model shots and some contextual shots. So if we'd seen, for example, and look, this is the reality of being the cheapie, but if we'd seen the Ice Warrior fleet move towards Peladon after it's called in, and then we'd seen Azixia's ship land, and then Azixia walks through a door, you go, okay, he's part of the Federation fleet that we're expecting to call in, and then you go, oh, but he's not. Whereas as it is, it's just like, part 4 started, we can now afford to pay Alan Bennion, so he's randomly just walked in, and I didn't get, as a kid particularly, that he was meant to be pretending to be the Federation troops.
Oh, right, okay.
He just, arrived, oh, well, the Ice Warriors have been discovered, so in comes their commander. And I think it lacks that contextual shots that I think it would have had if it had more money.
Good point. But yeah, look, overall, I don't think this is as bad as people make out. If you're sitting out there and people are terrifying you about it on Twitter, just go and watch it.
Look, I don't think it's great. I think it is a weak Pertwee story. This is the story where Pertwee's announcement had been made public.
Right.
And so that's where, as I understand it, first of all, he was starting to emotionally distance himself from the show and go, you know what, I'm not going to see all these people I've seen for 5 years in a couple of months, so I need to get used to that. But also, he was starting to get all the fan mail, like, dear Jon Pertwee, I've just seen that you're leaving Doctor Who. Please don't. I love you, Roll. Please don't. Change your mind. And, that would have a real effect on an actor. And some people accuse him of phoning it in this story. I don't think that's true, but I do think that he is a little bit flatter than usual. And in the same way, look, a weaker Pertwee story is still better than a lot of Doctor Who, and I stand by this being weak, but I stand by it being better. Jon Pertwee, a little flatter than usual, is still pretty exuberant.
Oh, yeah, and I think it adds a new sort of dimension to the character, whether you see him as maybe being a little drier or whatever it might be. You can sort of just see it as a natural sort of part of the character in this story, perhaps.
A little more world weariness.
Yeah, a bit of that too.
Which leads us into the Planet of the Spiders. Rob, I spoke a lot about Peladon, so why don't you kick us off with this?
Well, Dave, it's the grand finale. It's the one you hear about as a kid or a young fan, if you haven't already watched it, of course. And finally, it arrives and you see it. And if Invasion of the Dinosaurs is the one with the crap models, even though it's not the be-all and end-all of the story, Planet of the Spiders is the one that people say, that's got the big James Bond chase in it. And although it does take about half an episode, quite literally, in a 6-parter like this, which has tons and tons of padding, it's maybe not quite as legendary as you think that scene. That was certainly the scene that everyone talked about before I saw this story, even more so than the regeneration scene at the end, which is a marvellous regeneration scene. So that was the thing I was always sort of sold on with this story. And again, yes, the chase takes half an episode, but it's maybe not the be-all, end-all, Dave.
No, it's not. And look, if we're going to mention the chase, I've always found the chase quite exciting. I think it goes for exactly the right length of time. And it's not as though it's just a Panda car and a Corolla for 15 minutes. They change vehicles relatively often, including ones that fly and including the Doctor's Whomobile. So I think it's fine. And I'll use the line again. When I was a kid and the hovercraft drove over the tramp, I thought that was amazing. So it worked.
It's like something from the Goodies.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I just laughed terribly at that at the age of 6 or 7. I've said before, and I'll say it again, Is this the best story that contains a regeneration? Obviously not. There are far better stories. War Games, Caves of Androzani, etc. Is this the best story that is about a regeneration? I think so. I think there's only one in the history of the series that could compete for that title of being a finale that actively sums up and crystallizes and celebrates an era. You've got Barry Letts writing and directing this one. You've got a cast who are Jon Pertwee's favourite actors from the last 5 years, all back in all different sorts of roles. You've got Roger Delgado's widow comes back to be part of the celebration. Mike Yates is back. Una gets a return. And then you get that thematic end of the Doctor's spiritual journey, which I think is summed up, and his regeneration comes out of the themes of the era, which is a wonderful thing and very rarely happens, even down to his last moment. I think this is the most tear-jerking finale for a Doctor. Never mind the big, emotive, long speeches with Murray Gold's orchestra playing. Give me deathly silence as Jon Pertwee falls out of the TARDIS, says, "The TARDIS brought me home," and then his last line is a line that we've heard him use as a positive moment so many times before. While there's life, there's hope. Just to hear him say, while there's life there, and then watch the life disappear from him, that is so powerful, and I think it is the most effective summation of an era. I think only Parting of the Ways comes close to being a thematic full stop to a Doctor's era. And I think that this is absolutely incredible. Full of a lot of problems we'll get to, but I look over a lot of them because it just does its job so well.
It does. It does. And look, we were talking about this earlier, so I'm going to throw it in before I forget. I like the way this takes what had happened to a supporting character in the form of Mike Yates and used it to sort of kick off the scenario of this story. Yes. I think if this was older Doctor Who, like it was the mid-60s, Invasion of the Dinosaurs would have been it for Mike. He would have betrayed everyone. That would have been the end of his character. We wouldn't have him come back like this. So it's cool that it sort of fleshes out the world a bit and makes a supporting character feel far more three-dimensional. And in fact, there's a lot of strands running through the story, even like Joe sending the crystal back in the post.
Yes.
I think for someone who's been into the show in general, or even just this era, there's a lot of fan service. Even though no one ever said that phrase back in 1974, there is fan service because, Jo, she's not on screen, but she's a presence and she's sending the thing back, and we find out that she's been doing some stuff with Cliff. And, they read a bit of the letter, which is addressed to all of them, to the Doctor, the Brigadier, to Yates, to Benton. It's marvellous when they do stuff like that.
I believe we would call it the rewarding for the long-term viewer. And that's how it worked for me. Again, as somebody who was watching this show passionately as a young boy, to suddenly get a reference to Joe Grant, or that's the crystal, it again felt like a world. But I also like, as you said about Mike Yates, Mike does get to be redeemed. He gets to show that he is a good person, but he's not forgiven. It's not as though they say, "Oh, you know what, Mike, come back in a unit. You can be a captain again. Let's forget about all that nonsense where you almost wiped out humanity." He still carries the consequences of his bad decisions, but we get to see that Mike deep down is a good man.
Yeah, and has a good car.
He has a very good car.
I quite like the car.
Barry Letts was known as somebody who would experiment visually and try a lot of things, and it didn't always work. And I said this was a good summation of the era. It's a good summation of the good and the bad of the era, because I think there are some visuals here that they are frankly just a little bit too ambitious. I think most of the spiders don't work that well, particularly the early ones. However, the big spider model, the one that sits on Sarah's back at the end of part 5, is bloody terrifying. And the great one in the Cave of Crystals, that is a wonderful image. It's clearly a fake spider, but it just kind of works.
The way it's shot. And the fact that the Pertwee Doctor, who has been a very arrogant Doctor, a very confident Doctor, to see him genuinely terrified, that is actually incredibly effective. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, when you see a lot of spiders in the same room together, it's just like a lot of just a lot of little models sort of. Yeah, that doesn't work at all. But yeah, that close up, the voice lets it down to some degree. I mean, Rob, what is a spider meant to sound like? I don't bloody know. So I know how ridiculous I am in even saying that. But the sing-songy kind of high-pitched voice, I'm not quite sure it sells it quite right.
No, and there is that scene after the Great One's been killed where they cut to the council of spiders, and it's just a whole bunch of spider models sort of like thrown slightly akilter, and then the camera shaking, and we're meant to go, these are spiders all in peril. It's like, no, okay. I get you can't have 40 animatronic spiders, and that's fine, but it does just look like a bunch of rubber spiders just sort of like being thrown at the room. There's some CSO that doesn't work. Some of the stuff in the village does not have the best acting in the series, shall we say?
Yeah. I find all that section actually quite boring, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that is easily the weakest part of the story, and it does drag a little bit there. But I do forgive it because the opening and the closing stuff is really, really good. I want to talk about the Doctor because if ever you want evidence that the Doctor is not a morally perfect character and he's not the moral compass by which you should live your life, it is put very clearly here. The Doctor is a good person, but he's an alien, and he has flaws. And he is greedy sometimes, and he is arrogant sometimes. Not just in the way that he acts. Pertwee can be an arrogant doctor. I enjoy that, some people don't. But he can sometimes be forgetful of other people and forgetful of the consequences because he's so hell-bent on what he wants to do. And I like the Doctor as an alien, and I think it's really effective here. And that cause of the regeneration, as I said, is really effective. And the character of Campeau, who guides him spiritually towards that journey. And again, he doesn't sit there and point a finger and go, Doctor, I'm going to tell you why you're flawed. He lets the Doctor realise, you're right, I've got these flaws, and I've got to make amends for that.
Well, isn't there even a line about how he stole the crystal, and the Doctor doesn't even seem to consider that he stole? Like, I guess I did. Like, he hadn't even considered that as a possibility?
Yes, there is, yes.
Yeah, I mean, even that's a kind of arrogance in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a villain in Lupton who doesn't want to take over the world. He's just really pissed off that after working really hard, he got the sack and got made redundant, and he just wants everybody to go get stuffed. and that's such a cool idea for a villain.
It's realistic.
It is, although unlike the novel, he doesn't get eaten on screen in this one.
True.
But yeah, I do like all those characters. I think it just works so well. I like the character of Tommy. I know some people have said that his portrayal or depiction is problematic, but I think he's clearly shown to be the moral heart of the story, and his genuine bewilderment when he is, and this is where people would say, he doesn't need to be cured. Okay, yeah, no, I understand that. He doesn't need to be cured, but there is a change made to his mind by the crystal, and he's now able to learn and understand in a way he couldn't before. And the way that's played as well is just so good. I really like it. I do understand why people don't, but I like it.
Well, I think there is a line from Sarah to him, like, you're not normal or something.
You're normal now or something.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I thought, I'm not sure we do that today. But the actual change in him, I don't see it as, him being cured per se. I see it as just part of the story.
Yeah, and I agree with the line you highlighted being a bit of a moment, but it is followed up by the, you're just like everybody else. I sincerely hope not.
That's right, he has that really clever
comeback.
He has that
really clever comeback. So I think that you need to sort of see what they're trying to do, and I think it does work, and the actor makes it work.
Yeah, agree. So Dave, all up, I don't think the Pert goes out on a great story. It certainly has fun moments. It's generally trying to be something, and the death/regeneration scene is still amazing today. But across the 6 parts as an overall story, I don't think it really gets there. We mentioned earlier, it's no Caves of Androzani, it's no War Games, it's no Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways. I don't even think it's a Logopolis. It gets remembered for the regeneration scene, it gets remembered for the chase, maybe it gets remembered for, the spiders on people's backs. Yep. But does it get remembered as an overall great story? I don't think it does.
No, I think that's quite fair. I think that this is in the weaker half of the season. I think there are 3 absolute belters, and then Peloton's quite weak, and this is somewhere between those, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Caves of Androzani, amazing spectacle, action, exciting, wonderful piece of television. Is it about anything? No, not really. This, yep, it's got its flaws. It's got some special effects that don't work. It sags in the middle. It's not a perfect action story and excitement. But I regard it and appreciate it so very much as a summing up of a really positive era, an era that I love, a Doctor that I love. And I do think that, you're right, the regeneration scene is carrying a lot of water for this story, but it is, for me, the most tear-jerking and emotional and well-written of the regenerations the Doctors have.
Yeah, look, I do love the regeneration scene. I think what's carrying you through this, though, is because you loved Pertwee so much, whereas I've had this more problematic sort of relationship with the character. I do kind of like Pertwee now, but it's taken a long time to happen, and it still hasn't quite fully happened.
Absolutely. No, I think that's actually a really, really good comment to wrap up that story. Pulling back to the whole season, though, I think this is such a good, enjoyable season.
Yes.
And I think it is in some ways perhaps missed or ignored by fandom, perhaps because Dinosaurs has a bad reputation, Peloton has a bad reputation, Spiders has a mixed reputation, Death to the Daleks is, I think, kind of sneered down on. I don't think correctly, but it probably kind of is. So I think that's probably a bit of a problem for it. But also, because it's not seasons 8, 9, 10, I think it kind of gets seen as, the bad season at the end of the year. Joe's gone, Unit's not really around anymore, Roger Delgado's passed away, the opening credits are different. This is a sort of an adjunct to the Pertwee era. It's not real Pertwee. And it's dismissed a bit because of that, and I think that's really unfortunate, because I think it is an incredible, enjoyable season that I have had huge fun watching again.
Yeah, look, does he have better seasons? Of course he does. I mean, even season 10, immediately before this one, is a beauty. But I don't find I need to push season 11 down to big any of the others up. I think it's a good season. Is it really, really great? No. Did the Pert stay on a year too long? Maybe he did. Although I do like seeing him with Elizabeth Sladen for a bit of variety. I think he has a pretty amazing final season when you look at the writers. I mean, my God, he's got a Holmes, he's got a Hulk, and he's got a Nation story in one season.
Yes.
So it's not quite as bad as people make out this season, I don't think.
I think that I am better disposed to this than you. I think it is actually a great season.
Really?
So
okay.
So that's fine. We've arrived at slightly different places, but both positive.
Yeah, there are certainly some stories in here I really quite like. And some others.
Fair enough. I think that's a good place to end. Listeners, let us know what you thought. But I just really enjoyed watching this season again. And perhaps part of it is because this was Doctor Who for me when I was 6. And maybe going back to what I said in our mini topics, maybe there is a bit of that nostalgia bug working its way for me here. I watched The Invasion of the Dinosaurs, and as an adult, I do appreciate the writing. I do appreciate the message. But there's a part of me that can remember being a 6-year-old watching a Tyrannosaurus on Doctor Who and loving it. So that might help as well. And look, that's a very positive note to finish up on.